The room smelled faintly of pine wood and sage as Eric stands in front of a tall mirror, fidgeting with a tie that seems determined not to even out. Behind him, the golden rays of the sun shine through the large open windows, illuminating the handcrafted beadwork on his wedding jacket, a gift from Ayana's grandmother, painstakingly sewn to honor his joining the family. Outside, he could hear the hauntingly beautiful sounds of drumming and singing that came from his soon-to-be bride's tribal members. The traditional songs blending with the rustling of wind from the trees made it feel as if the land itself was celebrating their union. This was unlike any wedding he had ever imagined. Eric paused, staring at his reflection. Ayana had swept into his life like a storm, full of energy, passion, and unwavering kindness. She had introduced him to a world he'd never known, one of deep traditions and profound respect for nature. What she didn't introduce him to was the vast wealth her family held. He remembered the first time he visited her family estate. Wait, no, estate wasn't the right word. Sprawling legacy. Yes, that's it. Acres of beautiful land stretching as far as the eye can see, with a private lake that glimmered on the afternoon sun, and a home that seemed more like a museum of cultural treasures than a residence. He didn't think too much about it then. He just thought that this was a product of hard work and ancestral wisdom. But as he prepared to become part of the family, the magnitude of it all began to eat at him. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. Ayana was a vision of ethereal beauty. She was dressed in a gown of woven fabric adorned with symbols of her tribe. Her smile, which always made Eric feel loved, brought a tear to his eye, which he made no move to hide. "This union is sacred," said one of the elders with his eyes pierced deep into Eric's. "This is not only the joining of two lives, but also a joining of two paths. Respect this land, respect her spirit, and you will find harmony." Eric nods solemnly, though the elder's words linger, stirring an uneasy feeling within him. As the ceremony ends, both families erupt into cheers and laughter. As the celebration begins, Eric finds himself surrounded by Ayana's relatives, each one more impressive than the last. Her uncle was a businessman with ventures spanning 3 states. Her cousin owned a chain of successful resorts. Another elder casually mentions a trust fund that was tied to the land they were standing on. Eric felt dizzy. This wasn't a family. This was an empire. As the evening wore on, Eric sat at the edge of the festivities watching Ayana dance with her younger cousins, her laughter sounding all around him. A voice whispers in his ear, soft but insistent. "This could all be yours. You just need to find a way." Eric stands abruptly and looks around. He was alone, but that voice had awoken something in him, and he stands there looking at everyone as envy creeps in. Upon returning from their honeymoon, Ayana throws open the doors to their new home, a wedding gift from her parents. The house was nothing short of a mansion, a sprawling estate surrounded by dense forest. Eric walks in and his breath hitches at the vaulted ceilings, the custom woodwork which made it clear this was no ordinary home, but a symbol of their immense wealth and heritage. Ayana was in her element. She walked through the house as she unpacked their things, as if this was nothing to her. Eric wandered from room to room, looking at the priceless artifacts displayed on shelves, artworks lining the walls that alone were worth more than his annual salary. "Hey, handsome, you like it?" Ayana asked, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around him. It's incredible," he replies, though his words felt hollow, tinged with envy. How could one family have so much? He thinks to himself. Later that night, Eric couldn't sleep. This new luxurious lifestyle should have been comforting, exciting, but instead, it felt suffocating. He tossed and turned in bed until he finally gave up and wandered into the sitting room. The room was dark, except for the moonlight shining in through the large windows. There was just enough light for him to pour himself a whiskey. He looks out the window at the trees softly swaying in the night breeze. He's lost in his thoughts when he feels fingers glide across the back of his neck. He turns sharply. His eyes scan the room. They land on a tall, ornate mirror on the far wall. For a brief moment, he thought he saw movement. When he steps closer, the only thing he sees is his tired face reflecting back at him. His chest tightens as an unsettling feeling creeps in. Over the next few nights, Eric's dreams become disturbing. He finds himself walking through the forest with endless trees, each one towering and gnarled in grotesque shapes. A voice, low, guttural, calls out to him, but he can never make out the words. He wakes drenched in sweat, with the sound still echoing in his head. Ayana starts noticing his restlessness. "Honey, is everything okay? You've been different," she asked one morning at breakfast. "I'm fine, I'm just still getting used to all this," Eric says as he looks around, forcing a smile. Deep down, Ayana didn't believe him. One night, as Eric sits alone in the study, a strange chill settles over the room. The air grows heavy, as the shadows in the corner seem to stretch and twist unnaturally. He suddenly feels like he's being watched, and as he looks at the doorway, he sees a faint outline of a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, with hollowed eyes that seem to pierce your soul. Eric blinks and the figure disappears, but the heaviness in the air remains. That night, his dreams were more vivid. This time, he hears the voice clearer. "Give yourself to me, and you shall have unimaginable wealth," he hears the voice say. He wakes again, drenched in sweat, but this time, Eric doesn't feel afraid. Each night, the entity's voice grows louder and more persistent. Eric even started hearing its voice while he was awake. It was subtle at first, but it eventually invaded every quiet moment Eric had to himself. "You deserve more," it would hiss in his ear whenever Eric stared at an art piece on the wall. "They don't appreciate what they have," it muttered as Eric watched Ayana's family laughing during dinner. "They'd never miss it," it said one evening as Eric stood in the study in front of a locked cabinet filled with heirlooms. Each whisper rippled through Eric's mind until he thought of nothing else. One night, Eric found himself wandering through the dense trees in the forest. An irresistible pull leads him under the moonless night to a small clearing. The air was thick and heavy. In the clearing, the entity appears. It was skeletal, with elongated limbs draped in shadows that seems to contort around it like living smoke. Its eyes burned like embers, and its mouth twisted into a grin that showed jagged, sharp teeth. "You've come," it says in a low rumble that vibrates Eric to his core. "What do you want from me?" Eric whispers, his throat dry. "Not me," the entity replies, stepping closer. "It's what you want, what you've come to desire. I'm just here to help you take it." Eric knew he should have ran, but the promise of wealth and power was too enticing. "What do I have to do?" Eric asks, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. The entity laughed, the sound vibrating throughout the forest. "Accept me. Let me guide you. Together, we'll become more powerful than you'll ever imagine." Over the following days, Eric began to change. His reflection in the mirror, different. His eyes were darker, his cheekbones sharper, and his movements were as if he was a puppet on a string being guided by a puppeteer. Ayana noticed this change and voiced her concern over breakfast one morning. "Eric, is everything okay? You don't look so good. Would you like me to call the doctor?" "I'm fine," Eric snaps back, his tone sharper than he intended. "I'm sorry, he says immediately, his demeanor softens. I'm just trying so hard to adjust to this life now. This is so different from what I'm used to. Just give me time, okay?" Ayana nods, but she's not convinced. That night, Eric was in his study drunk and sitting facing the windows. The entity came from behind him. This time, it didn't ask, it demanded. "Take the necklace in the cabinet," he growled. "That alone is worth more than you'll ever see in your lifetime." Eric looks over at the necklace. It was sitting on a beautiful display locked in a cabinet. It looked ancient, clearly priceless. He stands up and walks over and stands in front of the locked cabinet door. He looks around and sees a letter opener on the desk. He grabs it and pries the door open. He stands there holding the heavy, ornate necklace. In this moment, Eric felt a feeling he's never felt before. A feeling of power coursed through his body, leaving him tingling in ways he's never felt, and he wanted more. That night, his dreams turned into nightmares as he sees himself standing over Ayana's family, his hands dripping with blood, while the entity looms over him, laughing. He woke up gasping, the entity's voice echoing in his ears. "This is your destiny, Eric. Embrace it." The whispers became roars as the shadows in the house moved on their own. Eric felt like he was losing control. He began to feel strange sensations coursing through his body. His muscles ached as they were being stretched. His bones felt like they were shifting under his skin. His appetite vanished, replaced by an overwhelming hunger he couldn't describe. It didn't matter how much he ate, he always felt hungry. His reflection in the mirror became more distorted. His skin grew pale. His eyes sank deeper into his skull, and his nails thickened into points. He did his best to hide these changes from Ayana whenever she asked about his paleness or why he avoided her touch. The whispers grew louder. They were now a chorus of voices driving him to take more from the family. "This house, this life, it belongs to you. Take it all. Eric, you're meant for more," the voices would whisper in his head. One night, unable to bear the gnawing hunger or the whispers, Eric returns to the forest. This time, he was searching for the entity. It appeared to him, towering and more monstrous than before. Its face seemed to merge with the shadows, and its limbs stretched unnaturally long. "Are you ready to claim your power?" it asked, circling him like a predator. Eric nods, his hunger and greed overwhelming his fear. "Yes, I want it all. Give it to me," he says. The entity lunged at him, its shadowy form enveloping his body. Eric screams as his bones twist and crack. His limbs lengthened and his skin tore and reformed into something unrecognizable. Antlers erupt from his skull and his eyes burn with an unnatural light. When the transformation was complete, Eric stands in the clearing, no longer a man but a monstrous Wendigo. His hunger no longer metaphorical. It was now insatiable and primal. Eric never returned to the house. Ayana and her family searched for him for weeks, but he was never found. Local hunters began reporting sightings of a skeletal antlered creature stalking the woods with glowing eyes. The neighboring towns started speaking of a curse and warned others to stay away from the forest. Ayana, heartbroken but determined, returned to the forest one last time. In the clearing, she found Eric's wedding band, blackened and cold to the touch. She knew then the man she loved was gone, consumed by his greed and the legend that had haunted her people for centuries. From the shadows, a Wendigo watched her, its hunger never satisfied.